There's no sugarcoating it. The EU is having a disastrous decade. But now it's finally running out of ways to hide it. Germany has posted 9 straight quarters of falling industrial turnover, shedding over 120,000 industrial jobs in a single year. France just borrowed a record €310 billion in 12 months and needed emergency legislation to do it. And according to Mario Draghi, no company in the EU worth more than €100 billion has been built from scratch in 50 years. This is the exact recipe that hollowed out much of South America, and Europe has been following it for nearly 20 years now. So today, we break down why many of Europe's factories are never coming back, why the French state can no longer pass its own budget, and why the smartest money on the continent has been voting with its feet. My name is Guy, and this is the Finance Bureau. Now, let's start with arguably the biggest problem facing Europe's economy today, the collapse of its industrial base. German industry has been losing roughly 15,000 manufacturing jobs a month, with the full year 2026 decline forecast at another 100,000 positions. Industrial production is sitting around 10% below where it was in 2018. And energy-intensive production specifically has fallen by 15% between February 2022 and March 2026. But there's perhaps no better symbol of this whole issue than Volkswagen. In December 2025, VW ended vehicle production at its Dresden Transparent factory, the first closure of a domestic plant in 88 years. CEO Thomas Schaefer's own words on it were, quote, "From an economic perspective, however, it was absolutely necessary." Roughly 20,000 VW employees had already signed voluntary departure agreements by mid-2025 as part of the broader 35,000 job cuts being phased in through to 2030. And some recent reports suggest a deeper restructuring is coming, one involving up to 100,000 job losses globally, and the potential closure of 4 major German plants. But in any case, the company is already shrinking its global production network from around 12 million vehicles a year to 9 million. Now, you don't plan for 3 million fewer cars if you expect to need the factories. Ford CEO Jim Farley summed up the mood in the auto sector as a whole, telling reporters in Paris in December 2025, quote, "We know we're in a fight for our lives in our industry." But there's another factor in Germany's manufacturing woes: relocation. BASF recently cut around 2,800 jobs at Ludwigshafen, the largest chemical site on Earth. And in March 2026, the very same company inaugurated a brand new €8.7 billion complex in Zhanjiang, China. Its CEO, Markus Kamieth, said that a BASF which isn't invested in China would be weaker as a result. But the chemicals giant isn't alone. ThyssenKrupp is cutting 11,000 jobs and shrinking steel capacity from 11.5 million tons to under 9 million. ZF Friedrichshafen is planning up to 14,000 German job cuts by 2028. And there's one factor driving much of that shift: cost. For one thing, German industrial electricity runs somewhere in the range of 18 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour, against roughly 8 to 14 in the United States and 7 to 12 in China. Meanwhile, cheaper Chinese brands hit 6.8% of EU passenger car registrations in April 2026, up from 3.2% just a year earlier, with June touching 10%. BYD registrations were up 152% year-on-year over the first 4 months, and in Germany specifically, up 318% in the first half. Now, there are some new car plants being built in Europe. The problem for the EU is they're Chinese. BYD's 300,000 unit plant at Szeged, Hungary, is due to start mass production in Q4 this year. XPeng is already assembling at Magna Steyr in Graz, Austria, while Leapmotor starts building cars at Stellantis' Zaragoza plant in Spain this August. So, Europe is, more or less, becoming the assembly floor for China's industrial base, but this only runs one way. Energy costs have made European manufacturing uncompetitive, regulation has made it slow, and once a chemical cracker or a blast furnace goes cold, it doesn't come back on. Now, deindustrialization spells disaster for the EU's largest economies. And what's more, a shrinking industrial base means a shrinking tax base too. And that's where the second problem starts, because there's one major country on this continent that is seriously struggling to pay for itself. France ended the first quarter of 2026 with public debt at 117% of GDP, around 3.5 trillion euros. Growth in that same quarter came in at exactly 0.0%. And the deficit is still running near 5%, which keeps France inside the EU's excessive deficit procedure. But the number that actually shows the compounding taking over is the nasty interest bill. Debt servicing has gone from 36.2 billion euros in 2020 to a projected 59.3 billion this year, with a July revision pushing it towards 64 billion. France now spends more on interest payments than on most public services that its citizens actually use. And bear in mind, that money buys nothing. It just goes straight to creditors. Fitch cut France to A+ in September 2025. S&P followed with the same cut in October, and Moody's has held France at AA3 with a negative outlook since revising it that same month. And to say there's been political friction from all of this would be an understatement. Prime Minister François Bayrou was forced out nearly a year ago after losing a confidence vote over his €43.8 billion austerity plan. Sébastien Lecornu replaced him, becoming France's fourth Prime Minister in under 2 years. Parliament then failed to pass a 2026 budget on time at all, forcing emergency rollover legislation in January just so the Treasury could keep issuing debt, a record €310 billion of it. The budget was eventually adopted on the 2nd of February after 2 no-confidence votes. But when it comes down to it, this is the South American pattern in its purest form. A country where the numbers demand austerity, but the politics make austerity impossible, so the debt simply compounds. Lecornu said in July, quote, "I am sounding the alarm with gravity. We must adopt a budget to avoid pushing the country into the ravine." And as if France and Germany struggling to this degree wasn't bad enough, stacked on top of it all is yet another bill. NATO data shows an aggregate European shortfall of around €226 billion against the 3.5% defence target. So, EU members now have to fund militaries they spent 30 years neglecting, using money they don't have, in economies that aren't growing. Now, a continent this indebted could still borrow its way through all of this, if it were growing or if it were building anything new. But it isn't. In 2000, the EU accounted for over 21% of global GDP. Today, it's around 14%. China went from 7% to 20% over the same window, and the United States was flat at roughly 25%. From that perspective, this is a straight wealth transfer and not in Europe's favour. Since 2008, US real GDP has more than doubled, while the EU's has grown around 20%. And if you think Europe simply chooses leisure and quality of life over work, well, EU GDP per capita has been stuck at roughly 70% of the American level for 3 decades now. So then, where did the value go? Well, there are currently 0 EU companies in the global top 25 by market cap. Europe's largest listed champion, ASML, is worth around $638 billion. SAP is $209 billion, LVMH $233 billion, Siemens $214 billion. Meanwhile, Apple alone is worth $4.88 trillion, Nvidia $4.69 trillion, Alphabet $4.05 trillion, and add up America's Big 7 and you're north of $20 trillion. Europe's entire top tier doesn't get you to a fifth of that. And this is where Mario Draghi's 2024 report on Europe's crumbling competitiveness comes in. He said, quote, It is a matter of concern that in the last 50 years, not a single company in the EU with a market capitalization of more than 100 billion euros has been set up from scratch. Every large European company you can name was essentially inherited, and nothing new gets built because nothing new gets funded. Venture capital between 2020 and 2025 came to 1.33 trillion euros in the United States against 252 billion euros in the EU. Draghi's report found that 30% of European unicorns relocated their headquarters between 2008 and 2021, mostly to America. But the worst part is the complete paralysis. Draghi asked for 750 to 800 billion euros a year in additional investment. Nearly 2 years on, implementation is estimated at around 30%. The Capital Markets Union is stalled, as is the so-called 28th regime for startups. Ursula von der Leyen said in September 2025 that, quote, "Every single member state has endorsed the Draghi report." Well, endorsement is great, but there needs to be action. And following von der Leyen's comments, Draghi said the problems he identified had actually gotten worse. So, Europe produced a perfect diagnosis of its own illness, everyone acknowledged it, and then nobody actually did anything to sort it out. Now, keeping track of stories like this is next to impossible for one person, which is exactly why you should sign up for the weekly Finance Bureau newsletter. It's completely free and we break down the biggest developments in global markets, macro, and everything else that could move your portfolio. Just click the link in the description or scan this QR code to get started. Right. Back to Europe, because while the issues we've covered so far are bad enough, there's a looming problem that could make everything worse. As of late July, EU gas storage was sitting at roughly 55% full. Germany specifically was at 46%, the Netherlands at just 35%, both record lows for this point in the season. The legal target for the 1st of November is supposed to be 90%. But analysts think the realistic ceiling is 75 to 78%. And prices are already moving before winter has even started. TTF gas closed above 60 euros per megawatt hour several times in the week of the 20th of July, having traded between 28 and 40 euros earlier this year. Then it fell 8% in a single session on the 27th. And that volatility is down to, yep, you guessed it, the market frantically trying to price the Iran war day by day. The Strait of Hormuz has been contested since the 28th of February. Iranian strikes damaged Ras Laffan, the largest LNG facility on the planet, back in March, with repairs estimated at up to 5 years. Then, on the 7th of July, the Qatari tanker Al Rakayat was hit by a projectile, and Qatar Energy declared force majeure, now extended through late September. Qatar Energy has since bought 33 spot cargoes from the US this year against just 4 last year, simply to cover its Asian contracts. So, Europe now bids against Asia for the same flexible spot cargoes every winter for the foreseeable future. But the EU managed to embarrass itself further in this energy crisis. Short-term Russian pipeline gas is banned as of June this year in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, EU imports of Russian Yamal LNG hit nearly 10 million tons in the first half of 2026, up 16 to 18% year on year, a record. So, Europe banned cheaper Russian gas delivered by pipeline only to keep buying more expensive Russian liquid natural gas shipped in by tanker. And if you think EU citizens are just sitting back and accepting all of this, think again. Anyone who can move their money out of this has already started doing so. Euro area households reportedly now hold around 34% of their equity investments in US markets against roughly 35% in their own continent. According to Henley & Partners' 2025 report, France lost a net 800 millionaires. Germany lost around 400. However, one EU country did see a notable inflow of millionaires, Italy. The main attraction there was its flat tax regime, where you only have to pay 100,000 euros a year on all foreign income, regardless of how much is earned. So, When capital is fleeing from certain EU countries, it's really fleeing a tax code. In many EU countries like France and the Netherlands, taxing the existence of wealth rather than income is now becoming mainstream fiscal politics. And that is perhaps the most South American step of the lot. The productive base ends up shrinking while the deficit doesn't. So the state stops taxing what you earn and starts taxing what you have. This accelerates the exit, shrinking the tax base and widening the deficit until the next tax becomes inevitable. Now, an economy can limp along like that for a while, but a political system is another story. 20 years of flat wages, unaffordable housing, industrial towns losing their anchor employers, and energy bills triple American levels produce exactly one political outcome, which is a sharp turn away from the centre. The AfD is polling up to 29% in Germany. The Rassemblement National sits around 36% in France, with Marine Le Pen already declared for 2027. The FPO, which won the largest share of around 29% in Austria's 2024 election, has kept gaining ground since. And in the European Parliament, the combined National Conservative and Hard Right blocs, ECR, Patriots for Europe, and Europe of Sovereign Nations, hold between 170 to 190 seats, depending on classification. Now, keep that in mind and consider the inevitable political battles lining up. The 2028 to 2034 EU budget, Ukraine funding, the 185 billion euros of frozen Russian assets sitting in Euroclear. Who really pays to rebuild the EU's militaries? Every single one of those requires unanimity from governments that can't seem to pass their own domestic budgets. Even the 21st sanctions package, adopted on the 23rd of July, had to be watered down with a Greek carve-out. Looking at the South American parallel again, the destabilizing force there was the permanent back and forth between extremes, not so much that there was one radical government. Europe could end up so fractured that each administration reverses the policies of the last, so no long-term planning is even possible. But consider the state of the EU right now. Investment has already stopped arriving. If confidence in Europe deteriorates further from here, things will only get worse. Nobody in Buenos Aires woke up one morning and chose decline. They chose one reasonable-sounding decision at a time to protect incumbents, tax the productive, borrow against the future, and view every crisis as just a temporary blip. And the counter-argument for Europe is always the same. It has institutions, rule of law, and the assumption that it's simply a rich place. Well, Argentina had all three in 1930, when economic historians place it among the wealthiest nations on earth, richer per head than France. But wealth is a continuous flow. Europe has been living off its history for decades, and it has grown complacent. The price of that complacency could now see it become an economic backwater and a timely reminder that past performance is no guarantee of future returns. Well, that's about all we have time for today, folks, but what do you think? Is the EU facing an existential crisis here, or will it manage to turn things around? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to understand the energy side of this in far more detail and why Europe is now the worst positioned gas buyer on the planet, then you can check out our video on that right over here. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. This is Guy, signing off.